Hi, everybody. Welcome to Mormonish. I'm Rebecca. We have our favorite returning guest, Ganesh. How are you, Ganesh?
I am incredible tonight and excited to be with you.
It's going to be fun. And it's funny you would say tonight, because for me, it's first thing in the morning. I'm in Italy. You are in New Zealand. It's like two ships that pass in the night, but somehow we felt this was so important to talk about after we put this presentation together. We're like, we got to do it, even though we're like completely on opposite ends of the spectrum here.
It's a miracle of modern technology that we can do this and talk seamlessly as if we are in the same room, which
That's
is
right.
is an amazing point of time to be living in. Soon, of course, there'll be AI instances of us running this whole thing without us even
Yep.
needing to be here. It'll,
That's
it'll,
it.
it'll record our voice, our mannerisms, and nobody will be any the wiser.
Nobody will know. And that is not too far in the future. I mean, since I'm kind of stuck in a hotel room every once in a while here, now that I'm here, I've been watching CNN Africa. It's the only thing that's in English, right? So I saw a story on the AI vocalist who has just landed a $3 million contract. And she was just created by
Wow.
somebody. And the song was just created. You know, you kind of type in, give me a song that's going to make me $3 million. And there it is, and it really is just AI. So someday it may not really be us. That'll be kind of interesting. We'll have to see what happens. But in the meantime,
I,
it is us. And this is an interesting slideshow. I kind of started putting it together. You know how I love to go over on Faithful social media and kind of look at questions and things like that and gather answers together. I had done that on the question that you see here on the screen. How do faithful LDS think the Book of Mormon was translated? Right? Like, I know that I have thought different things just through the course of my life. What I was taught as a kid, even then slightly morphed in college. Then suddenly here's a picture of the seer stone. What? You've had that the whole time as an adult, gospel topic essays. Even for me, I can trace how different the narrative has been on the translation. And the answers that we're going to go through here from the faithful social media, it's still, I would say, a hot mess, wouldn't you, as far as what people believe? Let's go to our next slide. I just gathered some pictures. Of course, a lot of what we know is from those rogue artists, right? So here's some examples. Did you ever see a hat in Joseph's hand when you were a kid at church or a teenager or a young adult? I never did. That was never
uh,
there.
and as a missionary, when that came up, I asked my mission president, and he said that was anti-Mormon lies, which
Mm-hmm.
I doubled down on the reliability of the church history department and my seminary and missionary experience, that I was teaching the exact truth, and and there wasn't anything to see there.
Yep, even these pictures, and I just grabbed just a variety. The plates are on the table. The plates aren't on the table. There's a curtain between them. There is no curtain. There's a hat in the hand. There's a hand on the plate. There's only the hat. The plates aren't there. It's just, like I said, it's a hot mess. It's everywhere. And I think when we start going through some of these quotes, we'll see that most LDS people also have different ideas depending on, I don't know, who they talk to, who's teaching them, how they were raised. But then when I brought this slideshow to Ganesh, I'm like, hey, let's talk about the translation. Well, of course, Ganesh is like, there's way more to it than that. Let's talk about where and why and who. So this is the fascinating part.
Well,
I've gathered some
it,
quotes, but Ganesh is going to get to the real heart of it. So I'm excited to go through this.
well, and I've got a few chapters on this very subject, so
Yep.
I was ready with information
That's
to
right. And we're talking
jump
about
at.
Ganesh's book, of course, when he says I have a few chapters on this. So yeah, I hope by now everybody has gotten that book. And as I understand it, you're working on an audio version. Is that correct? I heard that from
Yes,
somebody
yes,
yeah, because some of us
yeah.
are too
So
lazy to read anymore. Some of us probably can't even read anymore. So an audiobook, multitasking makes it really good. So are you going to read it yourself?
well, at the moment we've got AI reading it so that I can
Okay.
tell what's happening, and then there'll be bit of combination, I suspect, just because um, there's a lot of information, and it would be nice to break it up with different voices
Right.
because that'll make it easier to digest, I would think.
Yeah, no, I like that. And it's funny to me when people who aren't LDS read it or AI, because you get all those pronunciations, moron I, Nephi, Lamanite,
Yeah.
because who can really
I had to go
pronounce?
through and replace and do a kind of
Yes.
an audio version, right? But with Lamanite spelled with a
Yeah.
Y and Nephite spelled with an extra E, just so that you can get those very important pronunciations,
It
which
is important. All it
yeah.
takes is one mispronunciation, and some people just count the entire book. Well, he doesn't even know how to say Lamanite. So what could he possibly know, right?
I've also got something here too. If you can see it in the little
Oh,
screen, it's a little replica of a seer stone
oh,
that Brent and Erin Metcalf gave me when I went and stayed with them just a couple of months ago, and they gave me a copy so that I have my own little seer stone. So I brought that along as a little lucky charm,
wow. Ha
as
have you
along with
seen
this
anything?
presentation.
Have you been able to see? Have you tried to scry anything?
Well, actually, it's really funny because it's got this particular looks like a 3D printed version
Oh,
has a little hole at the bottom, and if you look in the hole, it actually says something. Um, so it does actually have words inside it when you go to look at it. So I'm not sure who made this, but they had a couple and they gave me one of their
wow.
versions. It's been cool.
That is fascinating. Well, I'm glad you brought a prop because this tracks with everything that we're talking about. And our next slide said, let's review the faithful explanations. As I said, this was all taken from one post, right? One post. And just the variety of answers is what was so intriguing to me. And I thought, I need to put these all in one place. So my slide says, it all started with an innocent question on faithful social media, as it so often does. And the question was, so how were the plates translated, right? This just popped up on faithful social media. I thought that he, Joseph, read from the plates from behind a curtain while others scribed for him. But I'm hearing a lot about stones and a hat lately. Which one is it? Or is it a bit of both? That is a legitimate and honest question from somebody on faithful social media going, how do I dissect this? And those pictures back there were ensign covers. And you can see the different, some of them were same kinds of pictures. Just they completely run the gamut, right? One of them even has those spectacles. They don't show that one very often because it just looks so strange. But that's the other thing. Spectacles, Urim and Thummim, touching the plates, know the plates are outside, what really happened. And Ganesh is going to help us cut through this.
Mm, it's going to be a fun ride.
It's
Okay.
going to be a romp. That's exactly right. So, okay, so why don't you read this first one? And again, I've just gathered kind of a variety representing different points of view from people.
So it was God, the short
Mm-hmm.
answer by the gift and power of
Mm-hmm.
God. So in the preface to the 1830 edition of the Book of Mormon, Joseph Smith wrote, I would inform you that I translated the book by the gift and power of God. When pressed for specifics about the process of translation, Joseph repeated on several occasions that it had been done by the gift and power of God, and once added, it was not intended to tell the world all the particulars of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon. And that was when actually his brother Hiram asked him to address an audience about how the Book of Mormon came forth. And so this was in October of 1831. And by this time, Joseph is now in Ohio, and he specifically declined to answer.
Mm-hmm.
He just basically said, "It's from God.
Yeah.
Trust me."
Yeah. That's all you need to know. And this person on faithful social media, that's the explanation. And I think that's kind of, that's kind of the party line almost at this point, just trust us. It was from God
Yeah,
because it's changed so
it's
much over the years.
yeah, and I think a lot of that is that kind of idea of, well, and I feel like this about the church in general, right? We're really concerned about the Book of Mormon as an artifact, that it
Mm-hmm.
exists. We're
Mm-hmm.
not so concerned about the things around it, like how did it come to pass and what's
Mm-hmm.
actually in it. The fact that it exists makes us special. So we should focus on that, not the how did we get it or what is in it.
Yeah. Oh no, and you see that more and more, whether it's historical or any of that. So I forgot I made this. I put the slideshow to go together a while ago. So Here's somebody who says it was a combination of translation methods. So this person says most of the church for decades only had access to the Joseph Smith history 1 through 62, which was written in 1839. So they built off of that as far as translation. By the time, I guess 62 says, by this timely aid was I enabled to reach the place of my destination in Pennsylvania, and immediately after my arrival there, I commenced copying the characters off the plates. I copied a considerable number of them, and by means of the Urim and Thummim, I translated some of them, which I did between the time I arrived at the house of my wife's father in the month of December and the February following. The full summary is that early on, this above process was used, and that was the translating the characters off of the plates. Then, during the last 116 pages translation, a portion read where their process placed a coat above their head to hide away all the light, except for the Urim and Thummim. And at this point, Joseph Smith switched methods and did something similar to a hat. So this person is saying he was actually, in a coat, kind of blocking out the light, and the rest of the Book of Mormon was translated this way. That is something I had never heard, picturing Joseph with a hood, like a druid, with the light blocked out. I mean, it just kind of gets weirder the more you dig in. Is this a method that you were familiar with?
No, and I think that this person's just kind of, trying to make sense of how it got from the idea of plates and characters through to the idea of the hat. How come the hat is used to exclude the light? So yeah, but we're going to talk a little bit later about so this commenter is right. This was written in 1839. So this is long after the words Urim and Thummim are used to describe this process, and up until 1833, and we'll talk about this later, that wasn't a term, like it wasn't a explanation. So this is something which has became part of the explanation, and then of course it sounded more biblical. The Urim and Thummim is a instrument of the Old Testament, and so that then everybody started to utilize that term to explain what was going on, because it sounded more responsible or in line with biblical understanding.
Yeah, it had that biblical weight behind it, which they take a lot of things and try to retrofit it, right? The temple, you just have to find some kind of something that sounds sort of like it in the Bible, and then it sounds really old-timey and important.
Then it's legit.
And it's legit, Bible legit. That's right. So this person,
this
I thought, like I said, all over the map. Here, this person had an interesting take on it.
So this person said, no plates were used. Joseph Smith did not read from the plates during the translation. The plates were a catalyst. When he collected them from the stone box at the hill Cumorah, they came with a set of seer stones, one on its own and another set of stones bound together like glasses. The latter are sometimes called spectacles. He would place a stone at the bottom of his hat and stick his head into it to block out the light, and the stone would glow faintly with an English sentence. He used the glasses too, but it's accepted that he tended to use the singular stone more. After he said the sentence out loud for the scribe to record, the scribe would say written, and the next sentence would appear, repeat until the Book of Mormon was complete.
And of course, I put on the seer stone, for those that are listening, I have a picture of the seer stone, and it came to pass, don't forget to drink your Ovaltine, right? From the Christmas story. But I mean, that is so fantastical. We all accept it because we've heard it our whole life. But to somebody hearing that for the first time, how did your scripture come to be? Well, I
mean, and you can kind of get a bit of a glimpse into why the seer stone wasn't a great story to tell to people. Like it just is weird. Effectively, a seer stone is a poor man's crystal ball, right? So the moment that you talk about a seer stone that perhaps words appear on it, some ghostly apparition from the past or the future, or so you start to really bring up images like a seance, and this is really problematic, and we'll we'll dive into this quite a bit later.
Yeah, very much folk magic. And I don't know, even today when people are aware of the seer stone, I don't know that they are aware of that part of it, that, the words appear glowing and written, and then the words appear again. I mean, that is just folk magic through and through. And I don't know who would really be comfortable with that. I guess you have to suspend your disbelief. So this person says, what was the point of the plates then? The original poster, after reading some of these different comments about how the plates were just, not really front and center in the process, the original poster says, then what is the point of the plates? So somebody answers that and said, there's a lot of debate around this, to be quite honest. From my point of view, the plates were a catalyst. So again, the catalyst seems to be the answer, kind of a catch-all for a lot of things. Seeing them provides proof to Joseph that he's not crazy and that these ancient writings really do exist. They're proof to the witnesses as well. Seeing them and knowing of their existence let him trust God more willingly, which led him to translate with the stones. It's really similar to the catalyst theory of the Gospel Topics essay of the Book of Abraham. Yes, it is, isn't it? A catalyst is a good answer, right? When things don't line up or match up. It was just a catalyst. These things are not easy to believe, and I completely get that. For me, the Book of Mormon has just been an incredibly powerful force for good in my life. I believe there have had to be some deep divine intervention in the translation of it. I think we all have to find our own way to rationalize the translation, and that's not an easy task. But it's the product, the 531-page book that we have now. That's exactly what you just said, Ganesh. It's the product, it's the artifact that tells me something divine happened here. Because I have this in my hand, something happened. I don't know what. I'm not going to dig too deep because it gets weird, but something happened. And these answers are all very sincere. And I hope everybody understands we are in no way making fun of these or anything. We're just trying to show just the incredible spectrum of, how people rationalize or justify their belief, or how they, interact with the Book of Mormon. So I thought this was a good and thoughtful answer. The person knows that it's in his hands. It means something to him. It's changed his life. Therefore, the actual method, it's okay. That isn't as important. So that's a very honest answer.
I like how, well, there is some awareness from this particular poster, right? That, they use the word crazy, they use the word rationalize.
Yes, yes.
They recognize that from an
Yes.
outsider point of view, this is problematic. And I think that, that's going to play into a little bit of how this actually comes about later, that we'll talk about quite a bit. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because, Mormons are smart. They know, and they probably know how they would be perceived from the outside world, if they were really just to say it was a seer stone and words appeared on it. And yeah. All right. You take this one. So answering, because on the thread, after a few answers, then the original poster popped back in and said, what was the point then, after he started? Yeah. And I don't know if the person was not LDS or an investigator, but seemed to really be sincerely trying to understand what this scripture was. So after reading a few of those answers, then he popped back in and said, well, then what was the point? And now people are trying to answer that.
Yeah. So what are the points of the plates? Well, our answerer says, I guess it doesn't really matter, but I've wondered about the implications for this. It basically means the translation work of choosing the English equivalent words or phrase was done by someone else and not Joseph Smith. Was it God himself or somebody else? This is pure speculation zone. I'm almost inclined to believe that maybe Mormon or Moroni did the translation posthumous to English at some much later point, with some anachronistic things being potentially attributed to translation. Just seems odd, for instance, for God to call a four-legged animal a horse, but isn't what we think of as a horse.
Yeah.
Yeah, and look, again, this person is, using speculation zone, implications, obviously at the end, just saying, look, there's some anachronisms, this person who's trying to answer this question doesn't have great answers, right? Because there are no great answers. At least the church hasn't given any great answers. And so just trying to fudge, trying to make straight what doesn't make sense. But which is, why are there plates then if he doesn't need the plates? If it's
Hmm.
all about stone, why is there even plates? Um,
Yeah, and so
yeah,
much emphasis on the plates. And then if you really dig into it, the Nephi Laban story, why did that have to happen? Why this whole time? And so
yeah,
the different answers are very creative. The one that says Joseph wasn't crazy because here they are really in his hand, and then he can move forward from that. But for the rest of us, we're like, it's pretty problematic.
yeah. So interesting.
Oh, so Revelation, somebody says, of course. Revelation, I don't much care about the details. I think that's kind of where you arrive. If something is super meaningful to you and, everything hinges on it, like President Holland says, right? And this is me speaking, then once you start drilling down and realize it's kind of all helter skelter, you have to just go, I don't care. It doesn't matter. This is what I believe, and this is what matters to me, and this is what I'm basing my life on. So this person says the same thing. I don't care about the details. Once you believe that God can perform the huge miracle of putting knowledge into someone's brain, the logistics of how seem relatively unimportant in comparison. So I guess this person is kind of equating it to a giant information download, just poof, there it is. Joseph knew it, and he was able to just speak it out loud, right?
Yeah,
Again, plates don't matter, seer stone doesn't matter. The answer, it was God, right? That's a great
yeah.
catch-all answer, but very real to a lot of people.
Oh, and if yeah, like you said, if you're finding meaning in this, and it's informing your life, and it's
Mm-hmm.
special to you, um, you know, and the details are maybe problematic if you start to think about them too much. Well, then, yeah, let's stop that thought and go back to, with God, all things are possible.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but that does bring up a couple of questions, and one is that, do details matter? Well, we're going to talk about some details later, so hopefully they do. Um, but also that idea. Well, then if everything's a miracle, then nothing is a miracle, right? It's kind of, it
That is
gets
a
to that
great
point
point.
where, gosh, if God can do anything, then why are, yeah, it just gets a bit sketchy, because then we start to say, well, why isn't he giving us those miracles if he can do everything? It's just becomes a problem, and there is that fine line you walk with the supernatural, which
Mm-hmm.
is, we want to believe in it, but our everyday experience generally doesn't have anything to do with that. So we've got to pick and choose our times when we ascribe what's happening to us to the supernatural. Otherwise, we end up in a psych ward, um,
Yeah.
because there are some people who are in that situation where everything is beyond their control. And actually, if you're going to be a functioning human being, you want to have a locus of control that enables you to deal with the world around you, not escape from it with fantasy.
Yeah, no, that's such a good point. And that I hadn't thought about this before, but yeah, you have to. Maybe that's why Mormons have they see miracles in things that the rest of us wouldn't. The story of the gnat coming back to life, or the elder Stevenson speaking at the MTC and the sound system goes out and he's still heard. The rest of us would go, yeah, but these are written up in the church news as miracles, right? Miracles still happen. And you need that to feel the presence of God. And then that reaches back into everything from the creation of our founding
Yeah.
scripture. And it's a catch-all. Why are there no artifacts around the Hill Cumorah? God took them back up into
Yeah.
heaven. God
So you
took
can
them
have
away.
faith.
It's a
No.
satisfying answer to certain people,
Yeah.
but then when you
Yeah.
share that answer with other people who have legitimate questions, they're like, oh, okay.
Yeah. It
I
doesn't
see,
work very well.
right? It doesn't work.
Plus, two, if you can justify that basis, everybody else in the world can justify that basis on whatever they believe, right?
Yeah.
There's no objectivity which allows you to make a informed decision.
Yeah.
It's just how you feel, right?
No, in fact, like I said, I'm here in Italy and I've been visiting some catacombs and some churches. And, some of the guides are sharing what they call some of the myths of the city. I'm in Naples, but they're not myths. There's things that really believe, like a saint's blood, collected from his martyrdom. And a couple times a year, it turns to liquid. And if it doesn't turn to liquid, then disasters happen. And this is a real, the guides that we're talking to, it's a real belief. Like they really honestly believe this, and they can point to times in history where the blood did not liquefy and something happened, COVID year or an earthquake. This is a real, kind of a religious tenet. It's something that they look at. But, to those of us on the outside, we're like, well, that seems kind of like a magic 8 ball or that, but it's very real to them. So you create your own paradigm, what you care about and what means something to you.
Yes, one man's superstition is another man's religion.
Wow, Ganesh. I feel like we should have some merch that says that, like a mug or something. It's very true, though. You're absolutely right. And who's to say, if it works for you and it doesn't infringe on somebody else, go ahead and do it.
Yeah. And really, as we're talking about that translation process, we're talking about superstition because, from other people's point of view, certainly outsider point of view, they're looking at us going, why would you even, how does this even work in your brain? Because it doesn't have any, you can't attach it to anything in your normal life, right? This is not how people get information generally, and we're going to talk about that too, because of course, in Joseph's circle, certainly in his place in Western New York as a New England refugee, lots of people had the same idea of how you might get information. Joseph wasn't the only one who had seer stones. We will talk about that later. That Hiram Page had a seer stone. David Whitmer had a seer stone. Oliver Cowdery had a divining rod. Martin Harris had dreams. They were the culture, the community that they were in, were deeply embedded in this idea that these objects or things could connect them to knowledge beyond themselves. And poor man's crystal ball.
Poor man's crystal ball. No, I love that. And most of us were so comfortable with that because that's what we were raised with. You were taught that from trusted sources, parents, teachers. You were taught crazy stuff to other people, right? And I had that problem. I had that issue when my kids started getting old enough, 3, 4, 5, where I could look them in the eye and say, and then, Jesus appeared. I had a really hard time. Words literally stuck in my mouth. I could not bring myself to say it. I knew I didn't believe it. I knew I was supposed to tell this to my children, and I couldn't do it. That was a big wake-up call for me, where I could not share these stories of the translation or the first vision, trying to have family night with my little kids. I couldn't bring myself to say it. It was a really interesting experience. I literally experienced a stupor of thought as I tried to, pass on the mythology. I couldn't do it.
Well, that's revelation that you're having there, Rebecca, according to Dr. Cumberland Section 9.
Well, yeah, unfortunately, I outsourced it. I let my kids go hang out with faithful family, and they were able to do it. So terrible. All right, what does this next one say? I think it's your turn.
Oh, yes. This answerer says, we don't know, and it doesn't matter that we don't know.
Yeah.
So they say we know very little. We believe that somehow between the plates, the Urim and Thummim, the seer stones, Joseph was able to receive the words through revelation, and he would see the words as if on a parchment. But that doesn't mean that God or Mormon or Moroni physically or spiritually made words appear. Joseph, acting as seer, received the revealed words and interpreted them in English. Oh my gosh, there's a lot to unpack with that sentence.
Yeah, I know.
It's interesting to speculate, but because there is so little documentation, I choose to spend most of my energy on the finished product.
There you go. You hit it on the head very early on.
The amazing text of the Book of Mormon. I have read and pondered so much about the translation process, including thoroughly researching critics, and there is no explanation beyond that the translation was a modern-day miracle from God. Joseph and his associates could not have written the Book of Mormon. So
Oh, okay.
effectively, this poster is bearing testimony at this point.
Right. There's the only explanation, the only plausible
Only
explanation in the
person,
entire
yes,
world is God.
yes.
So,
Don't speculate. Don't research. Don't go into the details. Just bear testimony. There is enough evidence for me to be very comfortable believing that the Book of Mormon is the word of God. In God's wisdom, he leaves us with some ambiguity to keep us humble, so we will rely on him for truth. Yes, we use our own reasoning, but we can all confirm truth by asking God and
yeah.
listening for his confirmation.
So feelings.
So,
This is very telling and a
mm,
very good synopsis. Have a lot of people have finally just kind of arrived at it, I think.
yeah, yeah, and look, it's completely sincere,
Yes.
but the underlying uh, assumption is actually we don't know, we can't know. It's really difficult, and it's better not to speculate
Mm-hmm.
and just go along with your feelings. And the fact that we have a Book of Mormon and it feels special, so you can rely on it. I guess the only trouble with that is that you could say the same thing about the Quran, of
Mm-hmm.
course. You can say the same thing about the Gita. You can
Mm-hmm.
say the same thing about all other. So this doesn't distinguish us from any other
Mm-mm.
religion across the world. It just and lots of those people, because I've talked to those people who firmly believe in those texts as divine, they absolutely tell exactly the same
Mm-hmm.
kind of idea. You know, don't worry about the mechanism. Focus on the fact that we have this book, we have this record of scripture. It informs us. It improves our lives. Therefore, you can know it's true.
Right. And I think this brings up that concept of it's by design that we don't
Yeah,
know or can't know. Same kind of thing with artifacts, from the wars of the Book of Mormon. Those are gone by design because that means we have to have faith and we have to
yeah,
humble ourselves and we have to trust God. And we have to ask God and we have to trust our feelings. There's a reason that the process is not known to us. There's a reason that the artifacts aren't seen. It's all part of the grand scheme. That's an answer too that you see a lot.
yeah. God's in charge. Don't
God's in
question him
charge.
too much.
Yeah, the answer is God. That's it. So this person said, and again, you make a really good point. These are all sincere answers. A lot of these people have really wrestled and researched, but the bottom line is the book is very meaningful to them. And so this is what they have arrived at. This is how they make it work. And we all do that in different areas of our lives. We all make things work that somebody else would go, I don't know why you're doing that, or you might want to look at it this way. So this is just what a human being does, right? There's nothing out of the ordinary in doing this. For something that means something to you, you make it work for you and you make it fit. So this person says, Joe, and I should clarify, I kind of summarize and put that little title in bold at top, and then the quote from the person is in the smaller text. So this person says Joseph couldn't have written scriptural language. So this person's kind of going to drill down into some of the details. Royal Skousen has wondered about the existence of a translation committee on the other side of the veil. Now, this is interesting. He's not super serious about it, but he's also not completely joking either. Oh, I don't think Royal Skousen ever joked. I don't know. We'll see. A large part of this is how the Book of Mormon is translated into early modern English and not the vernacular that Joseph Smith spoke. So some kind of translation committee on the other side of the veil. The King James Version was scriptural language, of the day back then. So makes a lot of sense as to why it was used for the Book of Mormon. I'm not sure if the Book of Mormon would have been taken seriously otherwise. So this person seems to be saying that, written in Reformed Egyptian, probably used the language of the time, but a special committee made up probably of people, who would have been alive during the King James Version day, perhaps, translated into the biblical language of the day so that it could be taken seriously, like the late war, right? Which is written in the biblical language, the King James Version. So that's an interesting spin on it. But you do have to explain why, something that was written thousands of years earlier would be written in King James Version-esque language. So interesting.
Yeah, and it's actually a little bit more complicated than that too, because what this person is referring to is Royal Skousen did a very detailed analysis of the original manuscript, the parts we have, and the printer's manuscript, and has determined that some of that. So you mentioned earlier, Rebecca, that some of the text in the printer's manuscript is in this kind of New York, upper New York vernacular,
folksy,
kind of
backwoods.
folksy backwards. So that suggests that Joseph's, language got into the text of while he was dictating. But also, there's another part of the language of the printer's manuscript which suggests it's early modern English, which is actually pre the King James version text. So we're talking 14th, 15th century here, whereas the King James is 16th, 17th century language. So Royal Skousen, in order to, this is an anachronism. It shouldn't be there, right? But Royal Skousen has put forward an idea that Joseph is getting the words from some otherworldly source, and this otherworldly source might be a committee of angels who are reviewing, maybe Mormon and Moroni's written text, and then putting it into a early modern English space. And I think it's a terrible explanation of what's going on there, and I don't know how Royal Skousen can say it with a straight face, but it's there, and he recognizes it's there. He doesn't, and he's given some idea of how miraculously it could be there. I think it's probably there because Joseph is really poor. This my explanation for this is Joseph is really poor, and so and he's also lame. Remember when he's got his leg surgery? This stops him from being able to work on the farm, which means that he's got a lot of spare time in his hands, and there's no TV, right? So he's reading books as a young man, something that his siblings can't do because they all have to be outside when it's daylight working on the farm. But because he's lame, he can't do much, so he's reading books. And I think he's probably reading books that nobody else wants. And so they've probably given him really old text that they're going to throw away anyway, or they've long since haven't read. And so he's probably reading an old modern English, and then that's affecting him when he's dictating and coming up with ideas. Some of those ideas are expressed because of some of the books, the really ancient books that he's reading, other than the King James version, which he's also reading. And we know that he's reading because Mother talks about that a lot. So he's very proficient in this King James version language, and that's why it comes out in his oratory production, in his dictation.
Yeah, so he can literally just talk it, can't he? He can just, he can just say it. Like I know I received missionary letters, we all do, from different people. At one point on one of my relatives' missionary letter, he started writing in Book of Mormon language, and I, so-and-so, having been sent to the land of, and it was a whole letter, of course I was concerned about his mental health, but for a while there, he was writing in Book of Mormon language. You can do that. And, I think Joseph wanted to give it the importance, right, of the Bible. But it's so interesting. This is a little tangent, but fits in with that. Have you heard that they possibly have discovered a new woman's name in the Bible that has been translated? Right. Yeah. So it's the second, epistle of John, which was to an elect lady, right? Now we see Joseph, of course, calling Emma, right? Not Joseph, God, right? An elect lady, using a term, a phrase that would be familiar. Well, now we find out it's not an elect lady. It's actually a person named Electa, right? It's actually written to a specific woman. Electa is a name in the Bible. So you can kind of see there, oh, okay, so wouldn't God have known that it wasn't an elect lady? But, Joseph didn't, right? He was very well versed in everything, and he's pulling those phrases out to give importance, gravitas to the scripture that he's creating. So yeah, but I think it would have said in the introduction, edited by angels, if that were the case, and peer reviewed by angels, but it's not saying that. So I don't know.
Yeah. I think, and to your point about the way that we talk, I mean, everybody talks in a different vernacular at times. And prayers are a really good example because we don't
Yes.
say prayers like we normally talk,
Right.
right? And if you're giving a blessing, you talk differently too. You know, that there's definitely a persona, a language, a vernacular that you take on when the thing that you're doing is of particular significance. And in the church, in this kind of spiritual significance, you're going to use they, these, and you're going to, expound in more kind of, oratory kind of ways, because that's the vernacular that you think gives your voice authority. So this is just human nature, really. So that's
no, it
crazy.
is. I mean, how many of us have been in Sunday school, like, and somebody's going, yeah, sure, blah, 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 and now I'm going to pray. Our dearest kind of, you go into the, you're like, oh, wow, okay, church persona. Yeah, we all have it.
Church persona. Yes. Well, and it is primary voice, right? Or
it's primary or missionary voice. They do that too.
Voice.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where that comes from.
Yeah. Okay, so this next one is the idea of no one knows. So somebody responder says, great question. I have read just about everything I can get my hands on about the plates, the other relics, and the translation process. Your question is one of the remaining questions I still have. My guess is that the plates were a physical testimony of the words being generated by the Urim and Thummim and the seer stone, but that is merely speculation. Joseph Smith was very non-specific about the process, and most of what we have is from the accounts provided by others of the day. I think that this is just such a very humble answer, which I think is so cool. This person saying, well, I've read a lot and I still can't make sense of it.
Exactly. Yeah. A lot of these people are very well read and they really do try to study things. And I'm sure they're using all faithful sources. They wouldn't dive into, well, I think they could dive into your book. I think I would suggest that to them. But yeah, and they're still scratching their head, but it's okay. It's still meaningful to them. It's important to them. And they're going to base their life on it, even if they can't explain where the heck it came from.
Wow.
Okay, so then the original poster, he kept popping back in as he was getting these explanations, says, well, then what was the point of the plates then, right? He's kind of realizing, wow, if they weren't really used, why, why this? And somebody says it's about the witnesses. Says the plates allow us to have the witness accounts, which in my opinion is one of the strongest legs we have to stand on. I would question that. So would you, but it's meaningful.
No, I totally agree with it. I think that's absolutely true. It's just if that's the strongest leg, it's a really bad leg.
The strongest leg is a weak leg. That's right. Give this a discussion a listen. This can't happen without something tangible. Imagine if the beginning of the Book of Mormon was just the first vision. We just have to, which is funny because nobody knew about the first vision for quite a while, right? We just have to take Joseph's word that it happened. These various accounts get critiqued for a variety of reasons. The witness accounts are hard to dismiss. Most of the 11 left the church and at one point and would have probably made bank on the lecture circuit discrediting the Book of Mormon, yet none of them do it. All because they saw the plates. John Whitmer's account is of particular interest to me. He was very antagonistic to the church when he left. And in one of the interviews with him, somebody asked him more or less if he thinks the Book of Mormon is true. He answers to the effect of, I don't know. I couldn't read what was on the plates. He saw because it was covered with a cloth, right? He saw something tangible. That is without dispute. Now throw in the stuff like the breastplate, the sword, the liahona, and the Urim and Thummim, and those are a lot of relics to forge if you are Joseph. These physical objects make the accounts really hard to dismiss, in my opinion. Yeah, so this person doesn't understand the power of suggestion or spiritual eyes or, some of the other things, and thinks that the witnesses physically, as was alluded to, held things, saw things, looked at things, all of the artifacts. They're like my mom, who believed to her dying day that there is a storeroom in the church office building where all of those relics are, and it's guarded by two Lamanite warriors with swords standing at the door. This is a belief my mom had. The church has all of these relics, not just the witnesses, but other leaders, apostles have seen these relics. And that's why their testimonies are so strong.
Yeah, which goes to show you that you can convince yourself of anything if you're motivated strongly enough to do so, right? And the witness, we could have a whole podcast on
and
witnesses.
We have, I think.
Yeah, I think we have. My two things would be that the witnesses are financially motivated. All of them, Martin puts up the money for the printing of the Book of Mormon. Oliver puts up his money so that Joseph's house, they can translate in it, and David Whitmer puts up his farm or his family's farm so that the translation can happen. So they're totally they're invested in this. They are going to get, they believe that they're going to get a financial return. And then all of the 8 witnesses are either Smiths or Whitmers. Both of those families are going to be financially sorted by the Book of Mormon making a profit. That's just the reality. So they were financially motivated. I'm not saying they're not sincere. I'm just saying that they all wanted to succeed. And then you have to take in consideration that all of those men are from the same folk magic culture. Like we said before, David Whitmer has a seer stone, Hiram Page has a seer stone, Oliver Cowdery has a divining rod, Joseph Smith Sr. has a seer stone and a divining rod. Martin Harris has dreams. They're all from that same folk magic community, and so they believe in what they can't see with their physical eyes, but they can discern with their spiritual eyes, and that is a massive part of their community arrangement. The Smiths are all treasure digging. They're relying on Joseph's account of what he's seeing in a stone to inform them of the guardians' spirits moving the treasure under the ground. This is a big part of their lives. Now, if the witnesses had included, we think about the witnesses that aren't there. Emma Smith in Doctrine and Covenants section 25 is told not to murmur because she's not picked as a witness, despite the fact that she's a scribe. None of the scribes saw the plates the whole time that they were scribes. And neither did Emma, and she's not allowed to because she's not from the same folk magic culture. She's from Harmony, Pennsylvania. She's from a different culture who don't believe generally in seer stones. And we know this because her father, Isaac Hale, talks about this quite a bit. He also doesn't come from the same culture. So yeah, the witnesses, they're highly motivated.
Right. And if you think about it, people disregard some of the other things that the witnesses witness to, right? That are not in line with the narrative. Some of the questions about Joseph's character, some of the things that happen, they kind of pick and choose what they agree with as far and discount other things said by the mouth of the same witness, right? That is not going to be good news for Joseph or for the church.
And one thing to add too is the Whitmers, they were ousted from the church. They didn't want to leave, but they were ousted by Joseph, and they formed, particularly David Whitmer formed another church based on the Book of Mormon. So the Whitmers believe in the Book of Mormon, and they take that belief into the next iteration of their lives. It's not like so when people say that the witnesses didn't deny their testimony, well, they're all firm believers in this folk magic world, but also they didn't have to deny their testimony when they got ousted from the church because they still believed in the Book of Mormon. They just didn't believe that Joseph was an ongoing prophet. They believed he was a fallen prophet. So, it's all about how you tell the story. And in this case, the witnesses, I agree with this poster. It's the strongest evidence of the whole endeavor, and it's just not that strong.
But it's such a good point that belief in this book, regardless of how it came to be or who brought it to be or the, failings of everything in the system, there are so many other religions that have formed around the belief in the Book of Mormon as a sacred book. A lot of faithful LDS do not understand that. They have no idea that there are so many other churches that the Book of Mormon is their founding scripture, and they've created their whole paradigm around it. And that can be kind of testimony shaking. I've accidentally given that information to people just in passing because I assume people know. I'm like, yeah, there's like 265 other churches, and and what? No, there's not. I've flat out been told that I'm lying or crazy, because that rocks your world to think that somebody saw read the Book of Mormon and went a different direction and didn't believe
Yeah.
in Joseph as a prophet. So it's problematic.
Warren Jeffs has a testimony of the Book of Mormon.
Exactly. A very firm testimony. Absolutely. Oh, this was an interesting one, I thought.
Yes. So this one suggests the plates were training wheels. So it seems that they were part of the education of Joseph Smith on becoming a prophet, seer, and revelator and translator. This goes back to Doctrine and Covenants, section 21:1. He first used the plates with the Urim and Thummim, and then he graduated to just using the Urim and Thummim, and then graduated to using a seer stone, and then graduated to being able to receive pure revelation without the use of a seer stone. Well, we're going to talk about that evolution in just a minute, so maybe I'll leave my
Yeah,
comments
we
on
don't
this
need to. Yeah,
slide.
we're just kind of going through the comments. If we stop and talk about every single one, which we want to, this is going to be a Mormon Stories level podcast. That's right. But I do think these are interesting, and I did try to choose ones that just show the incredible range of how people are able to accept and be comfortable with how the Book of Mormon came forth and what it means to them. So the plates were for Mormon, says this commenter. Says, along with what others have said, the plates were for Mormon too. He was called to write, to edit, to assemble a book of scripture. The plates are a sign, a seal of that task, and a guarantee that his work wasn't altered on the way to Joseph Smith receiving it. So sort of a provenance. I know that's a big thing. Dr. John Lindwell's brother, who's also, I think, does he work at BYU? I don't know, but he's written a book about the provenance of the Book of Mormon, how important that is, that's all intact. Well, I should write a book about the provenance of the Lord of the Rings, right? And the ring, right? There's a provenance there too. When your proof is in the book that you're trying to prove, it kind of is a circular sort of a logic. But, Mormon, it was for him. That's why we have
for
it.
him. Yeah. Yeah. There's so much to say on that, which, tricky. This is the Brad Wilcox explanation.
Oh, my goodness.
Which we love. The whole seer stone thing used to be weird to me until Google Translate Lens came out. You can literally hold your phone over a language that's completely foreign to you and perceive it in your own language. While, yes, the translation is still 100% a miracle and done by the power of God, the fact that we have technology today that can do a very similar thing just makes it seem more real to me. Who knows, maybe the seer stones were a kind of Google Lens that worked on faith like the Liahona. Well, yes. Well, I've got my seer stone here, and I'm willing to look through it and figure out that. Yeah, I don't think we can get away from the fact that this is a poor man's crystal ball. But this phone here, I mean, mine's not that expensive because I, don't invest like that. But, this is a piece of technology. This is what thousands of people have across the world, in all cultures and all places, and they can utilize it. This seer stone was only used in New England and in Western New York by New England refugees. The one thing that we're going to talk about a little bit is that one of the problems of the seer stone as an artifact, as a relic, is that it wasn't used in other parts of the United States. So when people started joining the church, this to them was incredibly weird. It didn't make any sense to them, because they weren't from Western New York, they weren't from New England, but the church's first 50 to 100 converts were from those places. They were from this folk magic place where seer stones, poor man's crystal balls, were being used, and that's why it got traction. But of course, the moment that people outside couldn't make sense of that, we dropped it from the explanation because it just looked laughable. And we got, Joseph Smith got ridiculed for his use of a seer stone early on the piece, and that's why we don't use it today.
Yeah, I think that's why, like I talked about that year 2014, the gospel topic essays, and when suddenly the church publishes a picture of the seer stone, to me that was like, what? You've had this? This is really a thing? And you're right, just a reaction that, oh my gosh, what have I based my life on? What is this? Because not familiar to me, not something that I would ever make any kind of credible decision based on that, similar to a crystal ball, similar to tea leaves, similar to, throwing the chicken bones, all of that, just occult like, folk magic like, but you're right. All the original converts, that was a valid, legitimate way that you could receive direction from God, and there was nothing wrong with it. So of course they had to pivot, and now they're trying to pivot these demonstrations by people like Brad Wilcox. Since when do you have to block out light to read your cell phone? I mean, is everybody doing this? It's such a strange demonstration that to me doesn't have anything to do with it. And that's really hit home when you see that video of President Nelson trying to demonstrate how Joseph Smith did it. And he has the white hat, on a table beside him, and he's talking to the interviewer. And then he goes, and then Joseph looked into it. He cannot bring himself to do what Joseph did, which is stick his head firmly down into the bottom of the hat. President Nelson kind of goes like this toward the hat, just like that. Yeah. But there's no way he's going to show the weird action that would be weird to everybody else, not people in the folk tradition, but everybody else, of burying your head literally up to your neck in a hat and then calling out words from it. He's not going to do that. That's going to alienate everybody.
No, and no president of the church, no apostle is using a seer stone to get revelation these days, right? They might be using their cell phone. I don't know, but
they could be Googling it. Yeah.
They could be good. And the other thing is that the seer stone is the only relic we have of this whole process, right?
Yes.
We don't have the plates.
No.
We don't have the sword of Laban. We don't have the breastplate. We don't have the spectacles.
No.
We don't have Urim and Thummim, whatever this is, and we'll talk about that in a minute. We also don't have an empty stone box on the hillside of Cumorah either, right? We don't have any weaponry from the great battles that were also fought on that hill. So we have no relics from the Book of Mormon except for Joseph's brown seer stone, which we know from accounts of other people that he acquired several years prior to the Book of Mormon coming forth. So this is a problem. It's a massive problem.
And that's key. That's absolutely key, because that relic is firmly rooted in reality and does have a provenance. He took it from this person. He used it for these purposes that were not religious, and then morphed it into using it for, his religious, divine purpose. And it is the only thing that exists, and it is firmly rooted in reality, nothing else. So, except for according to my mom, who says everything's in the bottom of the church office building, guarded by Nephites. It's there.
Guarded by Nephites. Those Nephites. I want to see them.
Yeah. You can see why you can see why I grew up to be a post-Mormon podcaster, raised with stories like that. As a little critical thinker, I was like, are my parents crazy? No, they were very well-meaning, but they definitely had, one foot in kind of the folk magic realm. They were okay with that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah. And you've talked before that your dad was a nuclear scientist.
Yeah, right? And my mom was a scientist too. Had her master's in zoology. That's what I'm saying. It's just crazy to me.
So which suggests that superstition has nothing necessarily to do with academic credential, right? Yep. You can be incredibly intelligent and still have some really, really far out ideas that you don't test, even when you're a scientist, right?
Yeah, and it's
And this is
compartmentalization. I mean, I've talked to other people that, had a very scientific background who have since stepped away and they're like, I compartmentalized it. I never used the skills I had as a scientist, the scientific method, the research. I never turned that onto my belief, my superstition, my all of that, until finally something happened that allowed the two kind of worlds to merge. So yeah, it's pretty. Oh, look, I did include a picture of the hat. Yeah, see, he tips toward it. He won't.
No, and
Oh, that's funny. I
makes
think, is it
sense.
your turn? Are you reading this? Or did you read the Brad one?
I think, well, I can't remember, but I'll read
I
this.
can't remember either. We've talked too much.
What hat? Not to derail the discussion, but has anyone heard about the stance that Joseph Smith only used the Urim and Thummim to translate the plates directly? And any suggestion that he used a seer stone or a hat or had the plates wrapped during the process is false. I've run across a couple of videos online that have been adamant about this idea. Is there any foundation to these claims? My understanding is that the description from Joseph's own scribes has been pretty clear on the different forms of the translation process.
So denial here, huh? Saying it didn't happen.
And there is a whole movement about that. The idea that that seer stones is part of a new Mormon history that historians are trying to undermine the church by bringing up these things, and actually the miracles that we all invested in, and particularly the coming forth of the Book of Mormon in the 80s and 90s, is the actual truth, and yeah, we should not even entertain any other ideas. So
yeah, but interestingly, this person is kind of saying President Nelson is not telling the truth. And look how uncomfortable he is. This is wasmormon.org. They grab all the quotes and put out great things. This is from that video. When asked about the translation, President Nelson says, we know that they had a table like this, and we know that they had the golden plates covered usually. And Joseph used these, the Urim and Thummim, seer stones in the hat. And it was easier for him to see the light when he'd take this position. So even that is not correct. It's not easier for him to see the light. Everybody else says he's trying to block the light. That makes no sense right there. You can tell he's uncomfortable. He kind of has a tell when he's going, he'd take this position. He did not say stick his head in a hat, right? He knows it's a strange thing to say and a stranger visual to act out.
Yeah, and I think that, and this goes back to the whole original question. If the president of the church can't give you kind of a really quick understanding of how things are happening, it's just so reasonable that no member of the church can do it either, right?
Exactly.
So,
and that's what we see from this. Everybody has a different idea. Everybody studied it, wrestled with it, arrived mostly with the idea that I feel okay about it, so I'm okay. But yeah, stone, what stone? I actually noticed a couple of weeks ago that the use of the seer stone is a bit of an assumption. So people are trying to dial it back here. I think it's a good assumption, and I have no problem with him using that stone in favor of the Urim and Thummim. But at least from the sources I've read, I think historians are making more of an assumption about it than I realize. And I included a bunch of quotes that we don't need to read. You can pause and read these. But they're saying historians are dialing that back. I mean, first there was no seer stone, then there was a seer stone. Now they're going, I don't think there really was a seer stone. So it kind of falls in and out of favor as far as a method being used.
And I think that's got a lot to do with how well it's adopted, right?
Yeah.
And your slides show that actually the general membership are not really adopting this understanding of a seer stone narrative, because they really still incredibly confused, don't know how it all fits in, and just can't make sense of it whatsoever. So they just kind of put it to one side while they focus on the fact that we have a Book of Mormon. I can, that's tangible, that's in front of me, and I can rely on the fact that it got here somehow.
Do you know if missionaries ever explain? I mean, if a convert, if an investigator or friend, as they're called, was to say, how did this book happen? What would a missionary say? Do you think they would just say by the power of God, or do you think they would say he looked into a hat, there was a rock in it? I don't feel like that's ever shared. So you have people coming into the church that have no idea.
Yeah, I think it's only shared if the person brings it up, right?
Yeah.
But
I
otherwise
don't
they
even know
just
if
go,
missionaries
yeah,
know. Some
no,
kids may not know or understand.
no,
I don't
they
know.
might not. Although it, yeah, the church over the last at least 10 years has tried to incorporate it into the seminary program so
Yeah,
that
that's
it's
true.
not weird to them. So it's possible that missionaries, young missionaries, probably know more than the average member on lots of these subjects
Yeah.
because at least they've got some of that information from regular sources, in class with other people rather than kind of in the background of the internet when you've gone, what
Yeah.
is this and how can I discover it? So yeah.
Yeah, there is an
So
inoculation, I think, in seminary, depending on how strongly there's a voice out there that's saying this is strange, or there's polygamy, there's
mm,
that. You can kind of see the curriculum addressing some of these in an inoculation kind of way. But there's that fine line. Do you tell somebody something they've never heard before and they lose their testimony that way? Or do you make it very palatable with an inoculation, type of a presentation? It's a fine line, especially for the teenagers. So. Oh, here's a
yeah.
good one. Let's see. I think you're reading this
Oh, okay, full of
one. I
holes.
know we keep losing track because we're talking in between.
I just feel like I've been talking a lot, so then I
And we're
think,
both
oh,
talking a lot.
It
Our
must be
viewers are
Rebecca's
probably like,
turn.
it's your turn. What's wrong with you? Keep track. We're like, look, we're trying
Okay,
to
full
pull
of
it
holes.
together here.
Full of holes, full of holes. The seer stone theory is full of holes. Namely, that all the accounts are secondhand. Joseph Smith never said he translated using the seer stone. This is correct. Several others said he did. That's also correct. Joseph said it was by the gift and power of the God. He certainly used the seer stone for other purposes, but I think the church may have been too presumptions.
I think
I think that's
presumptuous is what they were trying to say.
punctured
Yeah.
us to publish the paper on the use of the seer stone.
Mm.
I think more evidence is needed before that theory can be established as accurate.
Wow, they went there.
Those are them's as fighting words. I hope that we can poke holes in this particular theory as we talk about it.
Right. But that's convenient to just say, look, I think the church jumped the gun on that. And I've looked at
Yeah.
this and Joseph never said he did it. So I only believe what Joseph said. That's a legitimate point of
Yes.
view for some people. So
Joseph never lies, as we can.
no.
Know.
So this person talks about the series Saints, which is the church put out a series written at a fourth grade level where they basically try to explain church history and put it all together, wrapped with a bow. Begins with a volcano erupting. They draw a lot of lines, parallels between things that, I don't know, it's interesting. Saints tells the truth, this person thinks, from the church history, Saints, Volume 1, Chapter 6. Sometimes Joseph translated by looking through the interpreters and reading in English the characters on the plates. Often he found a single seer stone to be more convenient. Do you feel like yours is convenient there, Ganesh? You've got it there in your pocket. Just, hey, I think I'll just use
it right
this.
here.
It's pretty convenient. Yeah, exactly.
My little talisman.
That's
I
right.
can feel
He would
good
put
as
the
I
seer
hold.
stone in his hat, place his face into the hat to block out the light, not what President Nelson said, where he said to get more light, and peer at the stone. Light from the stone would shine into the darkness, revealing words that Joseph dictated as Oliver rapidly copied them down. This is from Saints. This is what the leadership is telling the members to go to read to get church history. So it's interesting that we've read several other comments that said, I think the church jumped the gun on talking about this process. This is not supported. So even among the faithful, there is scrutiny, confusion, and perhaps a little disbelief on this, which is, I just read, was right out of Saints.
Mm-hmm. Interestingly enough, and just for a side interest, is that Richard Turley photographed the seer stone. That's the one that we see in the that was released by the Joseph Smith Papers Project, and he also commissioned and oversaw the publication of the Saints volumes. So it's all the same. And now, of course, Richard Turley is he wrote the biography of Russell M. I'm sorry, of Dallin H. Oakes. So he's very close to him, and he's been commissioned by the church and President Oakes to write a new biography of Joseph, which he's doing at the moment, which is going to take another decade yet before it's out. But so the church has certainly committed to the idea, and with Joseph Rick Turley as the assistant church historian and now retired, writing this new biography of Joseph, that they are going to pursue this course that Saints has been a reasonable success, to kind of inform saints or inform members of the church some of the more problematic history without it being too graphic. Although, to be fair, a friend of mine from Australia messaged me on Saturday and told me he was out of the church. I was totally surprised. Being a bishop and a former in the stake presidency, I said, oh, what was the thing that kind of got you there? He said, reading Saints, the standard of truth.
Yeah.
He finally gave himself permission to kind of look through some of the inconsistencies that he had long since put away, because he's a bishop and in the stake presidency, you just don't have a lot of time to do much else than your calling and work. But then when he got a chance to read and go, hang on a second, I don't know much about that. I'll follow the footnotes to these understandings and find out what's going on, and the idea that this particular thing, like a seer stone, is a massive part of the mechanism for the bringing forth of the Book of Mormon. That was a huge shelf breaker.
Wow, that is so interesting. Saints, similar to the Gospel Topics essay. And that goes along with what I said about inoculation. There's a very fine line where you try to make everything very palatable. You put the devil in the details of the footnotes, hope nobody goes to the footnotes, and the majority of people will read it and go, that makes sense, and move on. People like your friend, are going to dig in and go, this is extremely problematic. So I mean, they must realize that some people will have a huge problem with Saints or the Gospel Topic essays, and may even, like your friend, walk away. That's a very interesting story. Wow. And he actually said it was Saints. Wow. Hopefully he'll write a review. This caused me to leave the church.
He's not the only one. I've got another friend who she read Saints, and she's like, hang on a second, I don't know this. Hang on a second, I don't know this.
Yeah.
And that led her down a pathway of she'd been a missionary. She'd been I think she had even taught at the NTC, and she had been a gospel doctrine teacher, and then suddenly reading Saints at a fourth grade level made her go, hang on a second.
Yeah, hold on. I think a lot of faithful members kind of know that about Saints, because I know somebody in the post-Mormon community who gave Saints to a faithful family member, kind of just, and the family member goes, oh, I see what you're trying to do. Like they knew it was probably, when you're like, no, I'm just handing you this book series that I got at Deseret Book. Oh, I see what you're trying to, they knew.
You're trying to take me away from the gospel.
Yes.
By reading
the curriculum that the church points everybody to Saints. They're like, read Saints, and I've heard anecdotally people, that you see these job descriptions for people, they need people to help write Saints, the next volume. And I've heard stories of people that, they're looking for creative writers, is what the job descriptions say, not historians, are looking for creative writers. And I've heard of people that, find it so problematic when you see how the sausage is made, the writing process, that they've had to, quit, step away, leave that job. So yeah, if y'all haven't read Saints, Christmas is coming up. Give it to family members. And I think, what are there, 4 volumes now, 5 volumes? They're just moving on through the.
That's right. And you can't get away from the price. The price is like, a couple of bucks. That's the
stuffer. I may get you and your wife a set for Christmas. That's kind of what I feel like. I was thinking steak white knives, but I think now it's going to be saints. So here's one that says those rogue artists, boy, they continue to throw the rogue artists under the bus, don't they? This person says, my understanding is being behind a curtain is the misunderstanding that was perpetuated by artists. Yeah. The curtain or blanket was actually hung over the front door of the cabin to still allow air in while blocking the view from curious spectators. I have never heard that. Now I'm picturing, oh, Joseph's at it again. The blanket's on the door, right? And if you were to go in, he'd have a hood over his head and a hat. It would be dogs and cats living together. So here's a quote from Was Mormon. Like I said, they're fantastic. If you guys haven't checked out their content, oh my gosh, they are on top of it. It says, curiously, in illustrating various instruction manuals, the LDS Church does not depict Smith using either the Urim or Thummim or the seer stone. He is almost always sitting at a desk and simply looking at the plates as though he was doing a regular translation. And that is Sandra Tanner who points that out. And it's only recently now that we see them attempting to at least have the hat on the table. Maybe he's touching the hat. He might be holding the hat at a distance. A couple pictures now that I've never seen. I don't know if I've seen them in church publications where his head is in it. But yeah, I will tell you that there is nothing that a rogue artist could get into any church magazine. Those are so highly curated and those are so controlled. There is absolutely nothing that is put in there that has not gone through several editing processes, several review processes. It's not just like somebody can just put something in there. And I always tell this story about my relative who wrote a story and submitted it to the then ensign. This is just to show you the level of control. And it was about his ancestor that was a polygamous wife crossing the plains and her, faith promoting journey. And they went back to my relative and said, this is great. This story, we're going to publish it. However, you must change it. She cannot be a polygamous wife. She has to just be a single woman who's traveling with the group. So that's how highly they curate it, how much control, the narrative they have. No rogue artist, no rogue storyteller. That is not going to happen. But all of us got our information about the translation by those pictures. That's what's in our brain. That's how we learn, a visual learner right there. So it's interesting.
Yes, and look, there's this comment interesting about the idea that other people are passing by the cabin, particularly in Harmony, because there is a main road that's running past Joseph Smith's little cabin. We're going to talk about that in just a minute, so we'll talk about.
We'll get there. We're trucking along. We're doing it.
All right.
Oh, here we go. Go ahead, take this one.
Brad Wilcox again. I get to all right. The shorter answer is, imagine trying to look, this is what you talked about for the phone screen while outside on a bright sunny day. It's hard to see. If you were to put your phone into something and put your face down into the opening, it would be a lot easier to see your phone screen a lot easier. So he's not going to be able to use that analogy very long because phone screens are getting so good and so bright, you can read them anytime. Whereas, he may well have been able to get away with this 5 years ago when, if it is bright sunlight, you're going to need to, shield your phone at some level. But that's just not the case now. My phone is...
It's not a phone, it's a rock that has words on it, And why can't God make the words legible or readable? Can't God do everything? Why the hat?
Yeah, and that goes back to that point of if everything's a miracle, then nothing's a miracle.
Then nothing's a miracle.
And then you're asking the question, why is that's one of the things I ask about the plates, right? You're thinking, if God can preserve plates for thousands of years, why doesn't he preserve paper for thousands of years? Like, it doesn't seem like there's any...
It's to test your faith. That's always the answer. God has a reason. We need to have more faith. It sounds weird because we have to prove that we believe. And the weirder it is, the more faithful we are if we believe it. It's a test.
Because the crazy thing is, of course, there are scrolls that have been preserved for thousands of years. And there aren't, plates, not in a codex like this. There's nothing like this, actually. So, it's weird that we're saying that,
this is so special. No, you're right. Like I said, I'm here in Naples right now. I've gone to some catacombs. I've gone to some different churches. I am seeing things from the 1st century AD. I haven't gone to Rome yet, where everything is even more in antiquity, but those things exist, and they exist very clearly and very well preserved. So yeah, this is nothing special. It's just kind of strange.
Yes. Brad goes to say, apparently it was the same thing here. The hat was used to make the dim screen more visible, though a better analogy might be a paper, since he was receiving short messages, and pages notoriously had dim screens.
Yeah, they're just so struggling to find a modern equivalent of technology, which, God is forever. God is timeless. Pages. Why here in the 21st century are we comparing it to this technology? It's so limited.
I like the idea of pager. I mean,
yeah. Beep, beep. Really hello, it's God. Give me a call.
I think it's time for you to pray now. Gosh, I know that half of the people that are watching this presentation will not know what a pager is.
Exactly.
So that's very crazy.
Yep. No.
All right.
A long road. So this person says, in my lifetime, and this is accurate, it went from translated directly from reading the plates with the Urim and Thummim to using the seer stone he used to search for the treasure. Now it's taught by the gift of God. Maybe it wasn't a literal translation. So this person sees it, probably, older, my age, and, the different things that we were taught, you just have to kind of say, whatever, it's here. That's all we know. It's here.
We got it. We got it. Yeah.
Yep.
And here's another one. No use of the plates. He didn't read the plates. The Urim and Thummim were placed where it was dark, and he could read them via the stones. The translation was displayed in front of him in contemporary English that was common for religious texts at the time.
Yep.
Okay, so yeah, very similar along those same lines.
Yep.
This commenter says neither, because he made it up.
Yeah, I don't know how this made it over on Faithful Social Media on the subreddit. I was banned instantly for making a comment. I made a mistake and thought I was on a different sub. So this person said neither because he made it up. So, wow.
This may be the most rational of all of the explanations that we've come up so far.
It actually makes the most sense. Then this person said he put the seer stone on the hat, pressed his face in it. The rock supposedly glowed with words, magically appeared. In other words, he made it all up. So people are definitely expressing that opinion that the most logical explanation is not, God. The most logical explanation is that he himself, made up the process and wrote everything in the Book of Mormon. So
just for just giving people can read this one, but it basically says the same thing in lots of more words. And then we have the Gospel Topics essay, the Book of Mormon translation, is along the same lines as the Saints' understanding. The most correct book of any book. The Book of Mormon came word through a series of miraculous events. Much can be known about coming forth in this text. And through a careful study of statements made by Joseph Smith, his scribes, and others closely associated with the Mormon.
And I think if anybody wants to carefully read this, you can pause and read it, or go and read the Gospel Topic essays on the translation. I mean, that was pretty revelatory when it came out. It really gave some details that a lot of people weren't familiar with. So yeah, we don't have to read every single thing. You can pause on it and someone can read it, or
I'm just going to
source material.
Bring some things out here. The Book of Mormon referred to in this instrument together with its breastplate as a device kept and preserved by the hand of the Lord and handed down from generation to generation for the purpose of interpreting languages. And I think this is a good thought. That the original idea, particularly in the Book of Mormon, was the idea that these things were called interpreters. That this was the original idea. And then this is seer stone. Okay, people can just read these ones.
Yeah, I think the next couple ones we can kind of just go through, because it just shows it has been discussed, throughout the years and decades, and the changes, were what was taught. It was kind of like the flavor of the day, right?
Yes.
Yep.
This one's quite good. The scribes who assisted with the translation unquestionably believed that Joseph translated by divine power. Joseph's wife, Emma, explained that she frequently wrote day after day at the small table in their house in Hamley, Pennsylvania. She described Joseph sitting with his hat, with his face buried in his hat, with a stone in it, and dictating hour after hour with nothing between us. According to Emma, the plates often lay on a table without any attempt at concealment, wrapped in a small linen tablecloth.
Isn't that
So,
concealment wrapped in a tablecloth?
yes,
Isn't that the definition
yes,
of concealment?
concealment. That is absolutely. And actually, we're going to talk about Emma in just a sec. So that quote is great.
Yeah.
And then Martin Harris says basically the same thing, that Joseph read those sentences aloud, and after penning words, Harris would say written, and an associate who interviewed Harris recorded him saying that Joseph possessed the seer stone by which he was enabled to translate as well as from the Urim and Thummim, and for convenience he used the seer stone. So yes, so we've got a good. So if we're looking at the faith, well, we're looking at the scribes of Joseph, Emma and Martin. They're saying there's a hat and a seer stone, but there might be something else. Is there a Urim and Thummim? Martin had mentioned, what? So yeah, this is the slide I added to it, which was the idea of, well, what's happening? Why is it so confusing? And really, it's because we've got a few different terms coming up in the text. So we've got seer stones, this thing here. We've got spectacles, the idea that there's some kind of, glasses-looking thing with two stones embedded in it. The idea of Nephite interpreters, which is what the Book of Mormon talks about. Urim and Thummim, which is this biblical term, which comes up in actually 1832 and 1833. This idea of word for word, this glowing stone with words, and then this gift and power of God. So I've done a few slides just on showing how maybe this, to try and make sense of this all, by understanding the kind of the audience and how it's changed. So
yeah, and I was going to say that when we were talking about it and you described, there's different accounts because of the audience. It was like a light bulb for me. I was like, that makes complete sense. So if you didn't pay attention to anything else we said in the last little while, this is where we get to the good stuff. This is fascinating to put this all in a context. I love it.
So depending on the audience was really about what you told them, right? Because of course, if you're doing this miraculous process, and you can imagine that Joseph is doing something, depending on who is around and what they think of what you're doing anyway, and how you might then relate or express what's going on, is going to be different. And that's exactly why we've got all of these different understandings. And so I've just put on the screen 5 types of witnesses, and I'll describe them. So Joseph has got some skeptical family around. He's, almost more than half of the Book of Mormon is transcribed and dictated at the Harmony farmstead where Isaac Hale is. And Isaac Hale is Joseph's father-in-law, who is really skeptical. And we're going to talk about his skepticism later. Jesse Smith is also a problem. The wider extended Smith family don't believe
Uncle Jesse.
Joseph.
Uncle Jesse.
This is Uncle Jesse.
Yes.
Now, Uncle Jesse writes a scathing letter in 1829 before the Book of Mormon is finished that really, I think, has a massive impact on Joseph and the way that the text evolves. Then we've talked about that a little bit before in some of our other episodes. Then there's the original folk magic believers. So there's the people who are around who believe from the same folk magic world. So what Joseph is telling them and expressing about what's happening is in line with their folk magic world. So David Whitmer, the Whitmer family in general, Hiram Page, who's Whitmer, a son-in-law, and Lucy Mack Smith. These are all the Smiths, all the Whitmers. They are from this folk magic belief. And then you've got these original leaders, Joseph Smith. We talked about that idea in 1831. He's not prepared to talk about the mechanics. And Oliver Cowdery it's quite a long time. It's 1834 before he kind of describes what's going on. Um, and again, he's not giving, very clear details, even though these two are the mainstays of Book of Mormon production. And then there's other believers who are maybe not quite from the same groups, but are closely connected to Joseph, and they believe that's Martin Harris and also Emma Smith. And we just talked about a couple of excerpts of they both talked about how Joseph has got his seer stone in his hat, but they've also got some other ideas about what might be happening. And then there's a whole lot of secondhand explainers. So people who are hearing these stories from these people. So there are newspapers that are commenting on this. And there are other members of the church who are joining the church and who are also trying to make sense of this idea of, how the mechanics work, what happened, and they're weighing in. So also Hyde and W.W. Fouts are weighing in early to try and explain this, particularly to an audience who are not from this folk magic belief, trying to help them understand it. And so they're the ones that first coined the term Urim and Thummim to refer to this biblical idea, because they're trying to make it palatable to an audience which is not folk magic believers who believe in, in seer stones.
Yeah, this is a great list. I love this. Everybody freeze on that and take a look at it, because it does explain so much. And the idea of making it palatable, all those things, like when people question the whole folk magic or the treasure digging, all of that, I've heard that spun as preparatory priesthood, right? Let's make it palatable. Let's give it sort of a religious context. It wasn't a treasure dig. It was using your preparatory priesthood, right? You're not casting a spell. You're using your preparatory So there's all kinds of examples like that. And it works. It works for people.
Yeah. And look, if you're trying to make sense of something, well, for me, the best way to do it is with a timeline. It's looking at the chronology. What are some of the things that are happening around the area that's helping, determine what, because we think that this is the way it was always told, but actually it evolved over time because, like we're talking about, the audience became different. Firstly, Joseph's first audience was his family. His second audience was his wife and her family. And the third audience were those who are now converted, like the witness. So they, depending on how you're telling the story, depends on how they are reacting to the story's evolving, because the people who are trying to understand it are questioning in different ways.
The church even uses that to explain the first vision, different accounts. Yes. They even say, when they explain that, different audiences, you tell them different things, right? Which to a lot of us are like, well, that isn't going to hold up in court, right? If you tell one person, you tell it in different ways. But this is the same thing he was doing with the translation process and how it all came together. So fascinating.
Yeah, that's great. So when you look at the timeline, you can see some really interesting things, and I'm just going to go through it really quickly, and then we'll talk about some points. So in 1825, Joseph is treasure digging, right, with his father. That's how he ended up in Harmony, Pennsylvania in the first place, because he's been hired by Josiah Stowell to find a gold and silver mine. And he's boarding with the Hales, which exposes him to Emma, and they get married in early 1827. By the end of 1827, Joseph retrieves something that he's telling people is come some treasure, and this causes a bit of persecution in Palmyra, and then he relocates as a bit of a refugee to Harmony, Pennsylvania, to his in-laws' place, and they give him a property on the land. Remember, Emma's heavily pregnant by this point. This is going to be their first grandchild by her. They don't like Joseph at all,
right?
But they're willing to put up with him because they love Emma and they're excited about their grandchild. So Martin Harris comes and scribes for Joseph from April to June 1828, and then Martin takes the manuscript that he's written and he loses it in June. So this is a major loss. By April, by the next year, the beginning of the next year, Joseph is starting again with Mosiah. And in April of 1829, Oliver Cowdery comes and scribes for Joseph. By June of 1829, remember, Joseph's on this main road. People are going past. He's suffering quite a bit of persecution. People are not appreciating him doing this. They're not excited about his seer stone use. It's foreign to the people in Pennsylvania. And so, David Whitmer comes and rescues the pair and takes them to his home in Fayette, New York. We see put in there that in that time frame, Oliver also gets a revelation. So Joseph at this point is not the only person getting revelation. Oliver is getting revelation, and we've talked a little bit about this before. By April 1830, though, the Book of Mormon is published, the church is established. September 1830, Hiram Page is now getting revelation. And he's getting revelation in his seer stone because he's a founding member. And that's just what New England refugees in Western New York, folk magic people are doing. They're getting revelation. Oliver's got some revelation. Joseph's got some revelation. Hiram Page has got some revelation. Like, this is not, unusual, except that Joseph stamps down on that Stockton Covenant section.
Gotta shut that down.
28. Shut that down now. And then, he sends, Oliver on a mission, and Joseph hooks up with Sidney Rigdon, and then relocates the church to Kirtland, Ohio in January of 1831. And then in October in 1831, at the church conference, he's not using his seer stone any longer, at least not to get revelations. And he's downplaying the mechanism. He's not telling people it's got for God's, because the people in Ohio don't understand this whole seer stone stuff because they're not from that culture. So it's just weird. It's archaic and it's superstitious to them. So
he can read the room. He understands. Okay, they're not going to get. I'm going to give it more of a religious spin. I'm going to make it sound more like it's from God. And he was good at that. He could read the room. He could tell the people what they wanted to hear. He was good at that.
Yeah. And he's done this before because he knows Isaac Hale doesn't believe in this either. He's also not from Western New York. He's from he's originally from New England, but he's been a Pennsylvanian for a long time. He doesn't believe in seer stones, so he tells Isaac a different story too, right? But Isaac can see. Isaac's visiting the family, right? Because Isaac is the family.
He's like, what is my son-in-law doing? Right. But I think Joseph was really good at finding a religious counterpart. It's not a treasure guardian. Oh, it's an angel. It's not a seer stone. It's a biblical Urim and Thummim. Yeah, there's a religious counterpart to every, folk magic technique that he uses. And he makes it more palatable, like you said, to a different audience.
That's right. That's right. And so August 1832, this is Orson Hyde is using the first term of Urim and Thummim, and then in early 1833, W.W. Phelps is using that term to describe what these instruments, the seer stones, because Joseph still has his seer stone. The people from Western New York who have migrated to Ohio, they have their seer stones too, right? So it's not like it goes away. It's just that it kind of gets suppressed and not revealed to those who are not in the know, kind of thing. In June 1833, we see Hurlbut his Philaster Hurlbut is, as a Methodist preacher, he leaves the church. He investigates Joseph by going back east to Palmyra to record affidavits from his neighbors. And he gets all these affidavits that talk about how Joseph was this treasure digger who used a seer stone. And this becomes the information that goes into the 1834 Mormonism Unveiled information. And E.D. Howe ridicules Joseph incessantly about his seer stone use. So Joseph believes in it, but he's prone to ridicule, and of course the people in Ohio are prone to ridicule. So he suppresses this. But we still see that by 1835, Joseph is using his stone to give patriarchal blessings. He's now calling his stone the Urim and Thummim, because that's how the people are and also 1836, he's using a seer stone to produce the Book of Abraham, but he's also calling it a Urim and Thummim. So that's how, basically, and we're going to prove it by various things, but basically the reason why we've gone from seer stones to Nephite interpreters is because, of um, because Joseph has to distinguish for his father-in-law what he's doing in Harmony, Pennsylvania. Then we go from interpreters, or the spectacles, they're kind of synonymous, to Urim and Thummim, because people like Orson Hyde and W.W. Phelps are trying to explain this use of a seer stone to people who don't believe in seer stones. So they're using this biblical instrument.
And it's such a good point. He believed in the seer stone his entire life. He was a magical thinker. He believed in magic the entire time. But hence the Jupiter talisman, right? On his last day on Earth. But he understood that other people didn't understand it. And so he had to kind of, work around that. But he himself, would you say, believed, in his folk magic tradition, took it with him to the very end. That was his true belief. That was it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. He's a firm believer, and look, the people around him are firm believers too, right? One of the things, when he relocated from Harmony, Pennsylvania to Fayette, New York, he did not take the plates with him, or at least he didn't tell people he took the plates with him, because he thought the Book of Mormon was finished. Fortunately for him, as he got to the Whitmers had seer stones. This is a picture of the Hiram Page and David Whitmer's seer stones against Joseph's brown exact seer stone and a white seer stone that we don't have a photo of, but this is what it kind of looks like. That also Joseph had. Joseph had several seer stones. Lots of those early members of the church, because they were from the same folk magic culture, they had seer stones too.
And that's news to people. Faithful members don't understand that. I know Radio Free Mormon and Bill Reel did an awesome episode on all the different, it wasn't just the one Urim and Thummim. There were multiple seer stones, because it's the folk magic tradition. And that's what Joseph was all about.
And they, after 1833, they start calling them Urim and Thummim, because that made it palatable when this was something that other people saw as superstitious. And look, Keith Erickson, who he did a fireside a few years ago, he talked about how the church has in their vaults, like tons of these things. Like there are, a whole kind of barrels of seer stones. They just can't ascribe them to anybody, so they don't know what they can't throw. They don't want to throw them out, but they don't know who they belong to. And so
they certainly can't display all of them, right? Because it paints a picture of, oh my gosh, we're really founded on magic and folk magic, and people are not going to understand that. It's off-putting. I can't think about it. It's disturbing, and then you have to spin and spin to make it, like you said, palatable.
Yeah. So actually, can I get you to read this, Rebecca? These are a couple of excerpts from the 1834 Mormonism Unveiled by two of Joseph's neighbors. So these people recounted their experience with Joseph and how he utilized seer stones back in his life before the Book of Mormon ever came to be.
Perfect. Okay, so neighbor Henry Harris in 1833 stated, I had a conversation with Joseph and I asked him where he found them, the plates, and how he came to know where they were. He said he had a revelation from God that told him they were hid in a certain hill, and he looked in his stone and he saw them in the place of deposit. And this is a statement to, as you described, how from Mormonism Unveiled. So he found the plates by looking in the stone. William Stafford, a Manchester neighbor, reported in 1833 on an early treasure dig. Joseph Sr., Joseph Smith's father, soon returned and said that Joseph Jr. had remained all this time in the house, looking in his stone and watching the motions of the evil spirit, that he saw the spirit come up in the ring and cause the money to sink. That's why they didn't find it, huh? We then went into the house, and the old man observed that we had made a mistake in the commencement of the operation. If it had not been for that, he said, we should have gotten the money. So Joseph isn't even on the dig. This is such a great gig or con, whatever you want to call it. He's like, you guys go out. I'll sit here on the porch. I've got my stone and I'll kind of guide things. And then when they come back and they go, I didn't find anything. He goes, yeah, I know. I saw it. Evil spirit. You guys did something wrong in how you arranged yourself or whatever. You didn't follow my instructions. That's why it didn't work. Come back next week, pay a little more money, and we'll try it again. Yeah, it's a really good gig.
And look, Mormonism unveiled in 1834 are full of these accounts.
Yeah.
They're full of Joseph's neighbors talking about these treasure digs, these esoteric understandings, the ways that. So this was incredibly embarrassing. So it was something that you didn't want to, you didn't want to highlight the fact that you were into seer stones and how they worked.
No, and I think the church spins all these accounts by saying, disgruntled neighbors, jealous neighbors, angry neighbors, not really being accurate in what they're saying.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, here's Isaac Hale. Now, I think Isaac Hale is one of the most important witnesses of the Book of Mormon because he saw most of it, right? The whole part between Martin Harris and Joseph Smith in 1828, and then from April to June of 1829 with Oliver Cowdery, he saw this happen. He is he's next door, but also this is his daughter who's pregnant, who he's coming to see, and and he can look in the window. He's going past this all the time. This is his witness of what's going on, and he says in his affidavit, and it's really interesting. Isaac Hale does an affidavit. He sends it because Edie Hale writes to him, and so he sends an affidavit. And then people in Ohio say, "Oh, that's not true. It's not. He's infirmed. He couldn't have written it." So then Edie Hale writes back to Isaac, says, "We don't. Is there any proof?" And so Isaac Hale gets a number of people to witness his statement and sends it back to him and to a whole lot of other papers around the area to confirm that, yes, he said this. Also, yes, these people know him and vouch for him. And he went a long way to tell this story because he's the most damning of all of the witnesses. Yeah. Because he's a first-hand witness. He's seeing this happen on lots of different occasions, right? He was there in 1825. He signed the deed with regard to the treasure diggers back then. So he's privy to this back in 1825. And this is what he says about that. His occupation was that of seeing or pretending to see by means of a stone placed in his hat, and his hat closed over his face. In this way, he pretended to discover minerals and hidden treasures. It goes on, but the manner in which he pretended to read and interpret was the same as when he looked for the money diggers, with the stone in his hat and his hat over his face, while the book of plates were at the same time hid in the woods. So in this case, the plates aren't even on the table, concealed. These are hid in the woods. Joseph is looking at his stone and his hat, and Isaac testifies that this is the same as 1825. As it is in 1828, as it is in 1829, when he's producing the Book of Mormon. So this is damning, and this is his assessment of what's going on. I consciously believe from the facts I have detailed from many other circumstances, which I do not deem it necessary to relate, that the whole Book of Mormon, so-called, is a silly fabrication of falsehood and wickedness got up for speculation and with a design to dupe the credulous and unwary, and in order that its fabricators might live upon the spoils of those who swallowed the deception. He absolutely believes, as a witness, as a first-hand witness of this process, that Joseph is making a fabrication, that he's made this all up. So, this is
interesting to me because I don't think I've seen this before, and I have seen the church portray Isaac Hale, the righteous, the righteous parents of Joseph and Emma, isn't he portrayed in a favorable way by the church? That they come
Yes,
from righteous lineage. And yet here is this person portrayed favorably by the church, righteous lineage of Emma. This is completely damning from a firsthand account and firsthand witness. And it sounds like notarized, basically, from all kinds of other
yeah,
witnesses. I have never seen this exactly in this way before. Why isn't this given more play? I mean, why
yeah.
don't people come across this?
I don't know, because Joseph never spoke against his father-in-law. He obviously respected him a great deal.
Mhm.
Um, but this is, yeah, it's incredibly damning. And I think, like, if we go back to the slide about the witnesses being the best evidence of the Book of Mormon. So Isaac Hale is a first-hand
Mhm.
witness. Like,
Yeah.
he has not seen the plates because he's not allowed to, and they're hid in the woods. But his account is absolutely the correct. None of the scribes saw the plates ever in the whole time that they were scribing for Joseph. They only ever saw a stone and a hat. The only time that because otherwise they wouldn't have needed to have been called as three witnesses in June of 1829. If they'd already seen the plates, there are no plates. There aren't any plates in Fayette. David can't attest to them.
So he is a
The
witness to the Book of Mormon. He is one of the
Yeah,
witnesses. And not only that, but he knew Joseph before. He knew
yes,
all the activities of Joseph before intimately. He's his father-in-law. He is a firsthand witness. So
yeah,
I
it's
think
absolutely,
I think we need to get this account out there. This is a lost witness that is never,
yeah.
never, really brought forward. And to me, this is really important.
Um, it is an E.D. Howe's book, and there's a lot more to it than I've just taken out the
Mhm.
excerpts that relate to particularly the coming forth of the Book of Mormon.
Right.
But yeah, it's yeah, Isaac Hale is incredibly reliable, and this is his damning testimony. Um, these um, these are Emma Hale, right? So she's one of the first people to be engaged with the Book of Mormon, because she's Joseph Smith's first scribe. It doesn't work out very well because she's got other things to do, and if he's waiting on her, it doesn't work. So that's why he gets these other scribes. But and we've already said the testimony before about him sitting with his face buried in his hat with a stone in it, dictating hour after hour with nothing between us, right? So that's Emma's account. Well, actually, do you want to just read it? Because
Yeah, and I was going to say it's
a woman's
interesting.
voice, and both of them are quite good.
Yeah, no, I think so. It's interesting some of those things that we read from faithful members saying, there's no real credible evidence, the stone and the hat. Here are the most credible people from early church history saying this is how he did it. So I wonder how they're spinning that to say there isn't credibility in it. It's kind of interesting. So she says, in writing for Joseph, I frequently wrote for day after day. Often he was sitting at the table close by him. He was sitting with his face buried in a hat with the stone in it and dictating hour after hour with nothing between us. So no, like some of those rogue artists, right? He had neither manuscript nor book to read from, and the plates often lay on the table without any attempt at concealment, wrapped in a small linen tablecloth. They keep saying that he's not concealing it, but it's wrapped up. You can wrap up I could wrap up something here and make it and say these are golden plates, right? It just has to kind of be the right size. So that's Emma Smith, late account, 1879. Also, now the first that my husband translated was translated by the use of the Urim and Thummim, and that was the part that Martin Harris lost. After that, he used a small stone, not exactly black, but was rather a dark color, and that's Emma Smith Bideman. We need to point out that she remarried on Joseph's birthday, whatever that means to you, and this is 1870. So here she's saying there's Urim and Thummim and then seer stone. Is that what she's saying? Am I
Yes, so that's what
interesting?
provides some of this confusion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because actually, Urim and Thummim is not correct, right? Because we know that that term doesn't enter the historical record
till
till
later.
1833. And I think that she's trying to make sense of the ways that her husband used the words Urim and Thummim later.
Right.
And that's why it comes in there. And that's why there's these kind of, what's the word, discrepancies in why. But she's making the idea that whatever it was that was with the plates, the Nephite interpreters, or whatever it was were taken, and that that effectively after that, after the loss of the manuscript from Martin Harris, that he's using his normal seer stone. To me, it sounds like he's always using his seer stone. It's just that later on they're trying to make sense of all the different stories which are now being presented, because what we find actually, these are accounts by Martin Harris, but one of the things I wanted to show you, so Emma says that Joseph used the Urim and Thummim, i.e. those terms didn't exist yet for the lost manuscript, but Martin Harris was the only scribe then, and he never scribed again, but he took once, this is an account of that Martin says, once Martin found a rock closely resembling the seer stone, Joseph sometimes used in place of the interpreters and substituted without the prophet's knowledge. When the translation resumed, Joseph paused for a long time and then exclaimed, "Martin, what is the matter? All is dark as Egypt." Martin then confessed that he wished to stop the mouths of fools who told him the prophet memorized sentences and merely repeated them. So this seems to indicate that even with Martin Harris, Joseph is using his brown, dark seer stone. And while they've taken a break one day, Martin's found a stone that he thinks resembles it enough that he puts it in the hat and tries to trick Joseph. Joseph has been staring at this thing for years.
He knows the stone.
He knows the gig's up, but he knows that. This tells me that he knows how to play Martin as well. And
isn't that great? What happened? I can't see.
Yeah.
But look Martin, at that part. He wants to stop the mouths of fools who says that the prophet memorized sentences and merrily repeated them. That's pretty accurate.
That's pretty telling, isn't it? Yeah. So, you can read those other accounts. But he's basically saying the same things. David Whitmer also says the same things. Now, remember, the plates aren't in Fayette, New York, for that part of the Book of Mormon dictation. But Martin Harris has a seer stone. He knows, he's aware of how seer stones work, and that they can work at a distance. So it doesn't matter that the plates aren't even in Fayette. They could be in Harmony, they could be in Pittsburgh, they could be in Palmyra, they could be on the moon. It doesn't matter. Joseph can see in his seer stone and get the words. That's Doctrine and Covenants section 7, where Joseph uses his seer stone to see the parchment of John and to translate that. Do you remember that?
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, I'm reading ahead here where it talks about how on the rock, it looks like a piece of parchment appearing on the rock and then writing on that. I mean, that's a detail too that I hadn't realized.
Yeah, so that detail comes from David Whitmer.
From David
Whitmer. A long
Whitmer.
time later. This is not till 1887 that he's writing this address. And this is what Joseph is telling him, right? Because look, if you've got a seer stone in a hat, and nobody else can see what's happening. So Joseph can tell, like we talked about before, it depends on the audience. Joseph can explain it however he thinks that the audience is going to accept what he's going to do. And
crystal ball. I see. Yeah, you don't see it. The fortune teller sees it and tells you, and you believe it.
Yeah. So that's what he's telling Martin Harris that's happening, that he's getting the words in a parchment. And that, so that's what David Whitmer's relating a long time later in his life.
No, I think, can I read this? I think this is interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry,
absolutely.
I was reading it and then I was distracted. This is David Whitmer. He says, Joseph Smith would put the seer stone into his hat, put his face in the hat, drawing it closely around his face to exclude the light, and in the darkness the spiritual light would shine. A piece of something resembling parchment would appear, and on that appeared the writing. One character at a time would appear, and under it was the interpretation in English. So that's new too. I never understood that the character from the plate would appear and then the English interpretation. Brother Joseph would read off the English to Oliver Cowdery, who was his principal scribe, and when it was written down and repeated to Brother Joseph to see if it was correct, then it would disappear and another character with the interpretation would appear. And as we know, each Reformed Egyptian character can be an entire page of English translation. So that makes it kind of interesting. This is what David Whitmer says. He further explained that getting the text from the seer stone would require rigorous exactment, else this particular instrument would refuse to perform its functions. So that is fascinating.
Yeah, the idea that Joseph had to be in the right mind, otherwise it would not work. So, yeah, so I mean, David Whitmer has no way to qualify what Joseph is saying, but David Whitmer has a seer stone of his own, and he's getting messages out of his seer stone in some way, and Joseph is telling Martin how something that Martin can understand, because it might be similar to how Martin is getting it. And we know that Hiram Page, which is Martin's brother-in-law, gets a whole lot of revelation that informs the church about the New Jerusalem, and that is something that all the Whitmers and Oliver Cowdery believe in, till Joseph says, no, that's from the devil, that information, you have to destroy it. So when you start to think about how people are engaging with, information from this esoteric world that is coming to them through devices like seer stones, you can see that, these people are they're part of it. They believe in it. They are experiencing it themselves, right? It's not like, so they wholly believe Joseph, that this is what's going on, and whatever Joseph tells them, they hook into. And that's why.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, I was just going to say, and that's why we have all of these kind of weird ideas about it later, is because they're just reciting different parts of these people's testimonies.
And it's funny because the Whitmer family is always portrayed as highly religious, right? The very religious Whitmer family. Yet the other side, the little known side, is highly religious, firm believer in folk magic, right? Which was hand in hand in the day. People were unchurched. Folk magic was part of religion. It was inseparable. So, but it's interesting that I haven't seen the church at all explain that even the David Whitmer has a seer stone. Really, I think a lot of people probably don't even realize that. So, of course, all of this, would make sense to them, and they would be totally on board with this. And it makes perfect sense that a parchment would appear on a rock perfectly with every character off of plates that were in another state. Of course, that can happen. Of course, that's real.
Let's go. We're not going to read this just because it's long, but this is just a few more excerpts from David Whitmer's 1887 address to all believers in Christ, where he talks about these ideas, and qualifies the idea that the seer stone, this being placed in the crown of hats. So it's just more examples of that same thing. This lady is really interesting, though. And this is one of the other Whitmers. So this is Elizabeth Ann Whitmer, who goes on to marry Oliver Cowdery. Now, Oliver Cowdery and Joseph Smith don't talk about the mechanics of the translation, right? But Oliver Cowdery's wife does in her account in 1870. She's a young girl in the Whitmer home when she also is a first. She's a a witness, a first-hand witness to what goes on. I might get you to read it just so it's in a woman's voice,
Yeah.
Rebecca.
No, this is fascinating. I cheerfully certify that I was familiar with the manner of Joseph Smith's translating the Book of Mormon. He translated the most of it at my father's house. An eye of 10 sat by and saw and heard them translate and write for hours together. Joseph never had a curtain drawn between him and his scribe while he was translating. He would place the director in his hat and then place his face in his hat so as to exclude the light, and then read to his scribe the words as they appeared before him. Elizabeth Ann Whitmer, Cowdery. This is an affidavit in February 15th, 1870. So just confirms what everybody else said. And it cheerfully certifies. So it was common, it was normal. Of course, God would speak to them through this method. Folk magic and religion were intertwined. They were the same.
Yeah, so we got lots of people confirming what's going on here. And so people who were neighbors in the past, Isaac Hale, David Whitmer, Martin Harris, Emma Smith, Elizabeth Ann Whitmer. This is really interesting. So there's also around the same time, right? There are some newspaper accounts of what's happening. So this is really interesting too. So I just put a few of them here, so I'll read them for you. By placing the spectacles in a hat and looking into it, Smith could, he said so at least, interpret these characters. This was the Palmyra Freeman on the 11th of August, 1829. So this is really early on. Another, Smith would put his face into the hat when he had a white stone and pretended to read from it while his coadjutor transcribed. This is the Wayne County Inquirer in Pennsylvania, and this is May of 1830. This is, the preacher said he found this in the same place 2 stones, which he was enabled by placing them over his eyes and putting his head in a dark corner to decipher the hieroglyphics on the plates. This is the Daily Albany Argus. This is October 15th, 1831. So you can see that there's commonalities, slightly different depending on the audience, but commonalities in the idea that there's some form of stone in a dark place and illuminating this information.
So the audience of these articles, the audience of these newspapers, they would not be super familiar with this folk magic tradition, and Mormons and their prophet would look really strange by these accounts.
Correct. And I think that's why, it starts to change, right? Because then they get pushback. How does this work? Right. This looks like New England folk magic that Benjamin Franklin warned us about, a long time ago.
Yeah.
So that you can imagine what seems reasonable to these Western New Yorkers are not going to be that reasonable to the general public, and they're going to see this as superstition and something.
Right. And now it's out there, and people that join this church look like fools, and their prophet looks like a con man, because nobody's on board with this kind of tradition. They don't understand it.
Yeah. So here's another couple of faithful sources for seer stones too. This is William Smith, so this is the prophet's brother and apostle of the church, right? This is his 1883, so this is quite a later thing, but he affirms, and he translated them by the means of the Urim and Thummim. Okay, this is the term much later that's used, which he obtained with the plates in the power of God. The manner in which this was done was by looking into the Urim and Thummim, which was placed in a hat to exclude the light, the plates lying nearby covered up, and reading off the translation which appeared in the stone by the power of God. So, William's kind of combining a whole lot of things in there. And this one from Joseph Knight Sr., this is he wrote this between 1835 and 1847. He says, now the way he translated was to put the Urim and Thummim into his hat and darkened his eyes. Then he would take the sentence as it would appear in bright Roman letters. Then he would tell the writer, and he would write it. Then that would go away. The next sentence would come, and so on. But if it was not spelled right, it would not go away till it was right. So we see it was marvelous. That thus was the whole translated. So
And
you
no
see,
one saw this. Nobody saw
no
the
one saw
words on
this.
the stone. This is all simply recounting what Joseph
Yeah,
told everybody as far as how the
yeah.
process worked. So everybody's just regurgitating and repeating what he says. He never let anybody peek or try to do it themselves because that's not how it works. He's the only one that can
Well,
work the seer
yeah,
stuff.
yeah. Well, his particular seal stone, anyway. Others had their own seal stones, so
Mm-hmm.
they were seeing their own things.
Now, until certain revelations said nobody else can get a revelation except for me because
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
problematic.
And here's our great pivot. This is William Wines Phelps, W. Phelps. So this is in 1833, and again, he's from Western New York, but he's trying to explain this to an Ohio audience.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I wonder, Rebecca, if you can read this for us.
Yeah, and I love W. Phelps. He's the one that converted my original founding ancestor, right? That
Oh, look
then,
at you.
10 or so years later was in the Mountain Meadows massacre. So it all worked out. He says the Book of Mormon, as a revelation from God, possesses some advantage over the old scripture. It has not been tinctured by the wisdom of men, with here and there an italic word to supply deficiencies. It was translated by the gift and power of God by an unlearned man. Maybe this is kind of where it starts, that he was dumb as rocks, right? And couldn't have possibly written it. Through the aid of a pair of interpreters or spectacles known perhaps in ancient days as Telephium or Urim and Thummim. So they're all running
Yeah,
with that narrative. The Urim and Thummim, it was just dice, right? I mean, I made a whole
yeah.
costume once to show what it was, right? The priest dresses up. He's got the Urim and Thummim and he takes them out of the thing and they say, will our crops grow? And he rolls the dice, right? And he's able to read them. Crystal ball, dice, magic 8 ball,
Yes,
chicken
yes
bones,
or no?
tea leaves, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, yeah. But if you frame it in a biblical context, it doesn't
Yes.
sound so weird, right?
Nope. It doesn't sound weird at all. Yep.
And I think so this really W. Phelps puts this in the paper in 1833, and this becomes the term that is coined for what's going on, and it becomes so effective. The Nephites interpreters doesn't really
Yeah.
doesn't kick off, but Urim and Thummim, that really kicks off, and it becomes the term that is used forever going forward. And so that's why we have all this kind of confusion that we've talked about earlier in the piece, because effectively it's all of these people are weighing in on trying to make it palatable to a non-folk magic crowd.
I mean, if they really had run with the spectacles with rocks in them, if those were the pictures on the walls of meeting houses, the rocks in glasses and, looking like outer space, it would be a whole different world, right? But they knew that wouldn't fly. So it's the
Wouldn't fly.
biblical Urim and Thummim that the priests use.
Yes.
I
And,
say
and
bring
so
back the rock glasses. I'm not kidding.
rock
I
glasses are
say
great.
put rock glasses on every picture of Joseph Smith. Let's just tell it how it is.
Well, Mormonism Unveiled, E.D. Howe's 1834 publication. This really ridiculed Joseph. And this is E.D. Howe's assessment of what's going on, which I think is pretty accurate, but it's so embarrassing that, of course, the narrative, it just can't stay. So this is what he said, and it's pretty hard. All who became intimate with them during this period unite in representing the general character of old Joseph and wife, the parents of the pretended prophet, as lazy, indolent, ignorant, and superstitious. He's referring to these interviews that he's publishing. Having a firm belief in ghosts and witches and tellings of fortunes, pretending to believe that the earth was filled with hidden treasures buried there by Kidd or the Spaniards, being miserably poor and not much disposed to obtain an honorable livelihood by labor. The energies of their minds seem to be mostly directed towards finding where these treasures were concealed and the best mode of acquiring their possession. Joseph Jr., in the meantime, had become a very expert in the arts of necromancy, speaking to the dead, juggling, so, basically pretending to see in a stone. The use of divining rods and looking into what they term a peep stone, by which means he soon collected about him a gang of idle, credulous young men to perform the labor of digging into the hills and mountains and other lowly places in that vicinity in search of gold. In the process of time, many pits were dug in the neighborhood, which were afterwards pointed out as the place from whence the plates were excavated. But we do not learn that the young impostor ever entered these excavations for the purpose of assisting his sturdy dupes in the labor. His business was to point out the location of the treasures, which he did by looking at a stone placed in a hat. Whenever the diggers became dissatisfied at not finding the object of their desires, his inventive and fertile genius would generally contrive a story to satisfy them. For instance, he would tell them the treasure was removed by a spirit just before they came to it, or that it sunk down deeper into the earth.
Wow, that's quite a portrait, and that's gleaned from all the affidavits, talking to everybody in the town. This was just common knowledge. This was the Smith family until they were reinvented to be a pious, holy, religious, oh.
And you can see how embarrassing this is, right? Because so lots of people were embarrassed by this and left the church, but some doubled down, right? And reinvented Joseph and his family as these epitome of society, these great amazing people. And and seer stones, no, we don't do that. That's in fact, Joseph kept using his seer stone in certain circumstances, usually in private. And when these accusations would come up, they would be slammed in the church publications as being, anti-Mormon lies, right? So that's how it's kind of continued on.
And so this such a paper happened. Trail. There's the court records of him being hauled into court for doing this kind of thing, the affidavits, but those can all just be pushed aside because it certainly doesn't fit the narrative of the prophet.
No. And it's confirmed by other people further on. I mean, all of this changed in a very short period of time in Joseph's lifetime, really when the church was in Ohio. But it's been reiterated by lots of other people since, and this is one of the most prominent of people who this is Joseph Fielding Smith, who is the grand nephew of Joseph Smith, right? This is Hiram Smith's grandson. Can you read that for us?
Yeah, this is Joseph Fielding Smith, church historian and later president. In 1956, said, while the statement has been made by some writers that the prophet Joseph Smith used a seer stone part of the time in his translating of the record, and information points to the fact that he did have it in his possession, such a stone, yet there is no authentic statement in the history of the church which states that the use of such a stone was made in that translation. The information is all hearsay, and personally, I did not believe that the stone was used for this purpose. That is incredible. That is incredible, given that the major players of early church history, his wife, the witnesses, the scribes, all say he used a seer stone. How dare Joseph Fielding Smith make this statement? Did he really not know of those statements by those, the founders of the early church, or was he trying to spin it?
He was definitely trying to spin it because those accounts were well published. They were well known.
But he didn't give Emma any credibility. He didn't give David Whitmer any credibility. He didn't give Isaac Hale any credibility. He didn't give Martin or Sid. That's so fascinating.
Wow. But it cemented the idea that this was an anti-Mormon lie, right? So, and just in closing, I went to Harmony, Pennsylvania last year, and it was really interesting going to the church site here because this particular church site, they have the hat on the table, they have the plates covered up there. They didn't have a seer stone, but I brought my own, so I put it in the photos there, as you can see.
Oh, you put that there?
Yeah.
Interesting. So without the stone is what's displayed there. They actually do have the hat on the table, and they have the plates not concealed in a bag, and then they have the pen and okay, interesting.
And it's interesting, actually, in that particular site, they do talk about Joseph using a hat for the translation. But in the other sites, they don't. So they don't talk about it in Fayette, and they don't talk about it in Palmyra. So it's interesting that the church kind of got slightly different narratives and different church history locations. I think that that's by design. They're trying to inform you of different things, but also, you know, if one idea is not palatable, you can go to the next place, and that idea there is going to be palatable, right? So there's, it's
Yeah,
interesting.
and I can see somebody who's just a tourist not knowing, if you don't tell them about the rock in the hat, they're not going to know. But members that go to these sites, aren't they going to say, wait a minute, I thought that I read Saints and I read the Gospel Topic Essays. I thought there was a rock in a hat. I mean, how are they going to reconcile this difference? That's interesting.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, and that's kind of hopefully that gives you a good idea of what happened, when it happened, why it happened, and how we got to what we have now.
Yeah, and
So
if those comments, on the faithful subreddit are any indication, some of them are saying, I think we need to turn back the clock and let's dial down that seer stone. They're saying
yeah,
the same thing that Joseph Fielding Smith said. I don't see the credible evidence. The church has jumped the gun in talking about, the seer stone and the hat. So I don't know. Do you see a day where they might soften that and kind of dial it back if public opinion goes that way?
I think they probably already have, in a sense that you know um, they were hopeful that they could bring up the seer stone and make it part of the narrative.
Mhm.
But actually, the pushback and the confusion show
Yes.
that actually people either don't want to know, or they're really conflicted when they're faced with these kinds of accounts. And so, actually, what you proved at the very beginning, Rebecca, was that people don't know, and they don't have any way to to reconcile some of the oddities of this, and so they're just going to ignore it as much as possible, and the church also is going to ignore it, right? Uh, we haven't, aside from that article in the Ensign in 2015 where um, uh, just Rick Turley talked about the seer stones, we haven't brought it up again, and despite we've changed some of the church history location information, and they got President Nelson to kind of show how the hat might be
Yeah.
factored in with this. You can see that it's just all very awkward, and
Awkward.
it just brings up more questions than
Yeah.
it answers. So therefore, they're just not going to talk about it because
No.
they'd rather people be confused and put it to one side than delve deep and have a significant understanding that this is how it actually happened. In fact, the majority of the evidence all confirms that a seer stone was used in a hat. And I would submit that there was never anything else but a seer
Yeah.
stone in the hat. So, this harkens back to Joseph's folk magic treasure seeking days, which Isaac Hale attests to. This is the same method. This is the same thing that's happening. And and the church can't admit that because it just is, for the same reason that it was a problem in
Mhm.
1833 and 1834. It's a problem now because it makes this look like a poor man's crystal ball.
Yeah.
This is occultist. This is superstitious. This is folk magic. This is not religion.
Nope. And this is a con. That's what it looks like. And I
Mm.
agree with you on testing the water. As more information comes out, they do test the water. Okay, we'll talk about the seer stone. We'll put out a picture. We'll try to make it seem okay. Then there's a lot of pushback. And I agree. They may just kind of recede on that. Same with polygamy, right? Enough
Mm.
information comes out about Joseph's polygamy. They finally have to come out and say it, but then pushback. We see that now, polygamy dyers. Are they going to have to recede? I don't know. There's a lot of things that we keep using the word palatable, but is not palatable to a modern audience, modern sensibilities. And this is why I think it's all about feelings now. Doesn't matter if it's historical, doesn't matter how it came to be, doesn't matter about the character of Joseph Smith, doesn't matter about marrying many women. None of that's important. How do you feel about our organization, about this book? What are your feelings? And that's all it's become. So, and that works, that works. That's a method. You can be in a silo. It gets increasingly narrow. And I think we've seen that till you're like this, right? A narrow silo blocks out the light. This is what we're doing. And by the light, I'm talking about truth, information, knowledge. You have to block out the light in order to be a part of this. So I think that's it. Wow.
That's quite a lovely metaphor to finish with, because that suggests that we're all kind of looking at our own little seer stone with our own little narrow perspective, blocking out any external, objectivity in order to focus on something that is going to prove ourselves right.
Yep. Nope. I think we did it. Hour 3, we arrived at the analogy that's going to break everything open, right? It's great. No, this has been fascinating. And I hope you guys have enjoyed this too, because, just to take that kind of trip down memory lane almost. I mean, a lot of our viewers and listeners are of our age, and they were taught definitely things as gospel truth at different eras in their life. And you can see now that people in the faithful world, they all have different ideas about this. And it's still morphing and it's still evolving. But I hope you pause on some of these slides, especially the ones that Ganesh put together, because there's tons of information there. I was blown away by some of them, especially Isaac Hale. I'm going to look more into that because I thought that was absolutely fascinating. And he needs to have more of a voice, I think, because he was certainly a firsthand witness telling everybody, yeah, my son-in-law, he's a magician. Yeah, sorry. That's basically what he had to say. So, all right, everybody, please comment. Let us know what you thought about the translation process when you were growing up. Has that changed? What were you taught? What about those rogue artists? What's your interpretation by the interpreters of all this whole translation, this soup of translation, right? There's so many different things out there, so much information from lots of credible sources that the church would consider to be credible. So let us know what you think about that. I'm sure we've been chatting in the comments and it's been really interesting. Please like and subscribe to Mormonish Podcast. And if you'd like to be made aware of when new episodes come out, you can hit that notification bell. If you would like to make a donation to help financially support Mormonish Podcast, we do have links in the show notes. We are a non-profit. If you're looking for somewhere to put a donation at the end of the year, we're getting toward that time. Mormonish Podcast really appreciates everybody that does that. You guys are fantastic. We also have links in our show notes to our merch store. We might have to start including a seer stone, right? I think everybody should have their own seer stone so that we can, exactly.
It's so cool.
It's so
I love
cool.
it. It makes me feel powerful.
I know. I'm telling you, you are a magician.
Transfer
That's right.
space and time.
That's it exactly. So awesome. And we thank Ganesh again for jumping on, even though we're at different ends of the earth and different times. He's podcasting late at night. I'm podcasting early in the morning, but we got it done. This has been fantastic. And thanks to your family for, parting with you in the evening, right? They're probably like, what? You have to do a podcast in the evening? But yeah, we really appreciate it. And we will see everybody next time on Mormonish Podcast. Thanks, everybody.